thank you, Michael, and the Influence Group for hosting another Higher Ed Facilities Forum. I really appreciate that, and it's been great to already see some familiar faces. And our goal here is to hopefully tell you something that you haven't heard before so that you can take it back with you. And so we're really excited to share with you. And we've already kind of huddled up and brainstormed and came up with a really nice roadmap of a good discussion to share with you. So I want to introduce our panel. We have Lisa James, the AVP of Facilities Management at Cornell University. We have Doug Marsh, VP of Facilities Design and Operations at the University of Notre Dame. We have Shane Conklin, Associate Vice Chancellor, Facilities and Campus Services at UMass Amherst, and Mike Chihoski, AVP of Facility Services at the University of Rochester. And we wanted to kick things off and just show you a few things that pulled right out of the higher ed media, things that are going on out there from universities are capable of change, but they must manage it better. I haven't heard that one before. Or sense of belonging, critical for addressing recruitment and retention crisis. Here's a new one. The Inflation Reduction Act is the largest energy incentive legislative effort in U.S. history. I don't know if anybody's gotten their funds yet from the Inflation Reduction Act, but if you have, please raise your hand. Okay, so not yet. Here's another one. Published tuition and fee prices fall in 2023. I don't know if that's happened to anybody here. And then I've seen that UC California has adopted new, stronger climate action goals to prioritize and direct emission reductions. So all sorts of things are going on in the industry. And what we did here is we huddled up and we got some insight from our professionals here and our campus leaders of what's going on in their industry and what can we share with you here today. So we're going to start things off by going to each of the panelists here and just getting their perspective of what's happening in their neck of the woods. So I want to start with Lisa from Cornell University. Lisa, what are some of the topics that are important to you at Cornell University?
So I think one of the things we're seeing that are giving us a lot of pressure coming out of the pandemic is the demands on program, and we're actually increasing enrollment at Cornell. And so the push to grow and do more and increase our facilities and renovate, and we're actually adding 2 new buildings right now on campus. And so the pressure on the deferred maintenance and the challenges with our older infrastructure are sort of being ignored, and a little bit more pressure on that space of how can we do more with that older footprint. Combine that with aging workforce and nobody getting into the trades and the buildings becoming more technically complex, facing a lot of challenges in that space.
Complexity plus lack of resources sound like additional support needed. Thank you, Lisa. Let's go over to Doug. Doug, we talked a little bit about this in our call, but could you describe the lack of construction resources in the country and how that was brought to focus by the pandemic?
Yeah, I see we're going to start off on a real positive note. No, it's a really good and germane question, and it's something I spent a lot of time with, particularly over the last 2 to 3 years as we all are dealing with this. This is a coast-to-coast issue, and your situation might be a little bit different in terms of 1 or 2 points either way, but by all analysis, costs are up in the last 42 months, about 42%. So 1% per month escalation, coast to coast, plus or minus a point or 2, depending on where you're at. And we know what sort of triggered that after 20 some odd years of 2.5% to 3.5% escalations that you could pretty much count on. You could build your budgets. So we're now in probably very similar camps where we're building or buying out jobs that were priced and budgeted back pre or right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so that thing isn't getting any better. We're having to deliver a lot of bad news to our senior leadership across the board and trying to find more resources to fund those projects or somehow cut scope, whatever, pull out rabbits out of our proverbial hat. So it's a really challenging time. And again, I really wish I could be more optimistic about the state of facilities in higher ed, but given the pressures on particularly construction, it's extraordinary and not made better by the sort of moderating of costs. The costs are back to about, 3.5% per annum, which is fine. but the base is built in, and this is something I have continual conversations with my senior leadership of, it's not going to get any better. Barring a major catastrophic economic impact to the country, which of course would be horrible, not something we want, the curve is built. And so all the escalation now is on top of that 42-43% growth. And we have to adjust. We have to adjust with our programs, with maybe even our specifications, with our standards. If we hope to sort of make incremental improvements on that, we just actually have to raise more money and find more funding for these projects that were, so much less before. And I'll just finish by saying what's clearly a contributing factor is the loss of construction supply in the market. We can talk a little bit more about that as we go on.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug. I'm sympathetic to the campus leaders, dealing with the complexity of, it's like, what's the next issue, and from the pandemic to supply chain issues to construction resource constraint. Now it seems like the enrollment cliff, recession looming. But I got to tell you, it still was hard for my son to get in anywhere with competitiveness of getting into a school. It's like you got on a wait list over here, and there's not enough room. So it seems like students are still wanting to go to college and get that college experience. So. And wanting a place to call home. And that's what you folks here are trying to make it right there. Well, let's go over to Shane. Shane, what are the strategic priorities that you're seeing in capital projects over at UMass Amherst?
Sure, thanks, Russ. So at UMass Amherst, I think I'll break this down into probably 3 different categories. The first being new construction to support academic and research initiatives on campus, and oftentimes that has to be expansion-based, just because existing facilities, it's very hard to modernize them, certainly cost effectively these days, based on what we're seeing for cost per square foot. And then capital renewal, just specific targeted investments for capital. And then also housing, and we're in the midst of a public-private partnership effort there. And so in terms of the first strategic priorities, we had a chancellor that just retired after 11 years of stability, and so we're currently working through design and early construction on a number of those strategic efforts. The first is for the School of Public Health and Health Sciences. It's a school that certainly coming out of the pandemic, public health is a major area of research and collaboration within the Commonwealth. And so our School of Public Health is distributed across 7 or 8 buildings across campus. They don't really have a home. It's really challenging for them from a student success perspective because they feel like they're all disconnected. And so we're doing a $43 million addition to one of their buildings that they occupy to really create a hub for their students, their advising center, and actually starting with some faculty hoteling options, which is new for our campus. We also have 2 $125 million larger investments. The first for sustainable engineering, for our College of Engineering. It's a great building because it's going to showcase a lot of carbon-free initiatives, both embodied carbon during the construction and also for heating and cooling. And then a computer science building, which our former governor had funded $75 million to because of a worker shortage in that industry. And so we're going to be continuing to expand that department through a major addition. One thing that's really interesting about the 2 large buildings, engineering, computer science, we actually have an executive order in Massachusetts where we're obligated now going forward to be carbon-free for heating and cooling. And so we operate a very robust and energy-efficient central heating plant. However, we're not able to currently connect to it for new construction. And so we tasked the 2 different design teams, because these are 2 separate projects, not in the same exact location on campus. So we tasked them to just figure out what would be the best solution, knowing we have these multiple developments. And so we're working through a separate energy exchange center, ground source heat exchange system that'll support both those buildings. And in order to try to save money, we identified a chiller plant that had a spare bay in it that we were able to fit out for all the infrastructure that's going to support the heating and cooling of both those buildings. So very exciting project. We do have geothermal on 3 standalone buildings on campus, but nothing of this kind of regional multi-building system. And then deferred maintenance. We've been working really hard to reduce deferred maintenance and have capital renewal. And so we're renovating a major building in the core of our campus. We had a theme of revitalizing the core of our campus, and we have a number of historic buildings that we've been addressing. And then I did mention the housing, so to set the stage for a P3, we've invested, I think, $192 million on average the last 10 years, and so most of that is debt service, which means we've kind of run out of the ability to probably continue at that pace, and so the public-private partnership really provided us an opportunity to add housing, 824 beds, in addition to some spaces that the campus will be able to operate. And so that's opening in phases over the last year and a half. And so it's an exciting new project. One thing we learned when we went into that was no two P3s have to be alike. And so it's kind of, you choose your own adventure and figure out what your priorities are. And sometimes that can be the most challenging piece up front, is to really know what do you want to get out of it. So those are some of the strategic priorities we've been working through.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, those sound like some really interesting projects that I think a lot of folks would like to visit your campus and take a look at, you know, because those are projects that you kind of think about and talk about at your campus, and then you're like, oh, I got to get into the weeds and that and try to figure it out. But somebody who's already gone as far as you have at your campus, be really great case studies out there.
Sure.
And,
we'd like to have your son come visit too, if he's interested.
Yeah, you know, he's a freshman here. Finish the 1 year and then go over to UMass and all the way across the country. You know, you mentioned something, Shane, about the decarbonization and electrification effort. I mean, it sounds really challenging, and I've heard executive orders like you mentioned. Is anybody else here in their state getting those same type of executive orders or dealing with those type of goals and plans?
Yeah. We have that in New York.
New York?
Yep.
If you're a D state, you probably have it, right?
We have the Pope asking us to do
The Pope? Oh. Well then, hey, is the Pope Catholic?
Laudato Si, care for our common home, guides us.
That's wonderful. Well, there you go. I mean, it sounds like that is like the path that we're all like walking down towards right now. So thank you for sharing that, Shane. Mike, let's go over to you, and this is one I've been looking forward to hearing more about. What's different about modernizing student housing in your neck of the woods?
So we just wrapped up about a year-long study on figuring out how to modernize our student housing. And before I get into that, I want to share a brief story that I think helps put it into perspective a little bit. So 2 weeks ago, I was contacted by our Senior Vice President of Advancement and Alumni Relations. He said, hey, I have 2 really important alumni coming to visit. I'd like you to show them around a little bit. They graduated together in the class of 1970. They haven't been back. They've been involved with the university, but they haven't been back on campus in about a decade. And just want to see some of the changes. And he asked me, he said, so one of them, he gave me the back, one of them is a really acclaimed surgeon. I felt pretty good on the medical side. We're building a new $750 million expansion on our hospital, so I thought we could talk to that. The other is the former U.S. Secretary of Energy, who is also a Nobel Prize winning physicist. So a little less comfortable there, but we are putting a big addition on our laser lab, which is where majority of our DOE research is. I went to look at physics. I went down and visited our quantum physics group to figure out what the heck they're doing. I didn't understand a whole lot of it, but I felt comfortable enough I could show them some cool things happening. So I get them both out there and I say, all right, campus is yours. What do you want to go see? The only thing they wanted to go look at were their old dorms. You know, we forget that most students, this is the first home they've ever had outside of their parents. And it really puts an impression on them that's going to last their lifetime. And that's our real challenge, is how do we preserve the history that the alumni want, while providing the modern features that the current students want. And that's the balance that we're trying to come up with. So I started by telling them, well, the good news is they look exactly the same as when you went here in 1970. The bad news is they look exactly the same as when you went here in 1970. So what did we learn from some of our studies, and what are the areas we have to fix this? So some of them are really easy. First off, let's start using the spaces for what they were really designed for. You know, as our enrollment grew, we crammed more people into some of these buildings. We took rooms that were designed to be a double and we made them a triple. You do that, and then all of a sudden, there's a trickle effect of that impacts how many people are using your lounges, how many people are using bathrooms, all the other things in a building. So we have to fix some of that. We realized we need swing space. You can't renovate these things over the summer. So we have to build new in order to be able to create space to empty at least a good portion of the building at a time, if not an entire building, to try to modernize it. What are some of the amenities we found out when we did a lot of polling of students and talked to them? No surprise to anyone, number one on their list is bathrooms. The way that we use bathrooms is really different today. I thought about it even, growing up in my family, I had 3 siblings, we shared a bathroom. My kids have never shared a bathroom. They get to college, and this is the first time they're ever being asked in a lot of our residence halls to have to share that space. And while they may all want 1 for 1, that's not realistic. But, what is a realistic number? And we went through, and we've set a goal now to try to get down to, if we can, over time, over the next decade, 4 to 1. 4 students per bathroom, whereas most of ours today are still closer to 8 to 1. And that's really going to be a challenge. How do we do it? And then the type of bathrooms. Even a shared bathroom approach is different. We set up a standard bathroom, may have 8 sinks, 8 toilets, 8 showers. And it was designed that in the 1950s, when students went in there, they all get ready for class at their 8 a.m. class together. That doesn't happen today. We don't need 24 stations. So can you take those same 8 and create private bath, toilet, sink, and shower all in one unit, and it still works. So we're going through a lot of that. Lounges, don't use the lounges the way they used to. We had a lot of combined kitchens and lounges. People find they hate the smell of somebody cooking food if they want to go in and study or use the lounge. So trying to separate some of those spaces. A focus, too, we didn't focus at all really on our graduate housing. So our graduate housing was, half of our student body are graduate students, but only 20% of our housing is graduate housing. And there's a demand for it. A lot of our graduate students aren't coming straight from undergrad. They haven't lived on our campus. They don't know it. They'd like to be closer to campus. We also have a lot of international students. And all of our graduate, we didn't provide any furnished apartments. They were just apartments. So somebody literally arrives in our country, shows up at their apartment, and it has nothing in it. And they have to go try to figure out how to furnish it. So they're sleeping on floors for the first week sometimes. So we had to do that. And then the last thing I would say that we learned, I think from COVID a little bit, was the importance of outdoor space associated with it. So when we brought the students back in August of 2020, we panicked and thought we had to keep them outside. What are we going to do this? So we literally ran to Costco and we bought little pavilions that we could throw up in a week. And we had them put up, and that's what they used, and we put some furniture in. What we found out is they were really popular. Students wanted to be outside, even in a climate like Western New York. So we had to go back, and we're now doing more defined outdoor space, and that led to even bike storage. They wanted indoor bike storage, but we've moved that to outdoor covered, and that's partly because of the rise in e-bikes. We don't want them bringing e-bikes in the building and charging them, because those batteries are a fire hazard, so the fire marshal doesn't like that. So we're trying to put charging stations outside, but keeping it covered.
My e-bikes, the scooters, they're everywhere. They're right next to the dorms. They're like piled up. Yeah. Right? You would never see that a couple years ago, and right. You bring up a whole new challenge, like powering all of that, right? And you bring up another thing too, Mike, about this is the student's new home, right? And they're wanting to feel comfortable with it. And I remember, getting and unpacking my son and thinking like, this is where he's going to live. And I was like, the one thing I wish this room still had was an automatic alarm clock, so I'd wake him up every morning at 6 o'clock. But you bring up all the things that you deal with as a parent and a student coming in. It's those little things like the smell, right? The bathrooms, how many students per room. All the things you got to factor when you are modernizing student housing. And I really appreciate those efforts, Mike.
Russ, when you mentioned, and following up on Mike's comments about the bikes, I think we're all seeing this just expanse of personal mobility devices that are electrified. And so not just storage, but just infrastructure on campus to drive these around campus. They're very fast. And so I think we're seeing that as a big challenge, and it kind of blends in with pedestrian safety, which we've been trying to do a lot of enhancements on, because distracted drivers, distracted pedestrians, a lot of students in crosswalks for the first time feeling like maybe there's a force field here because it's a crosswalk and not really being aware of your full surroundings.
No, absolutely. I mean, I drive one of our little GEM vehicles on campus, and I can't tell you the number of students that are either looking at their phone with their headphones on that are just going to walk right into your vehicle. You're standing there. So yeah, there's a lot of distraction amongst the students. They don't go anywhere without headphones in their ears.
I wish they wouldn't go anywhere without helmets on.
Yeah.
Well, that comes us to halftime here. We're going to do a poll. So you get your cameras out. We're going to put up a poll here. You can scan the QR code. Because we want to take your temperature here on what's keeping you up at night, what's taking a lot of your attention at campus. So when this pops up here, you have 4 different choices. Just pick the one that's going to take in the most of your attention. So we have determining the true cost of ownership for campus facilities, undertaking sustainable design with construction, carbon zero initiatives with climate action plans, and university strategic and master planning. Oh, okay. Oh, here they are. We're coming in. It's like racehorses here. Carbon's taking the lead. Strategic master planning, edging them out. Whoa, okay. All right, university strategic and master planning coming in at 43%, and then 30% determining the true cost of ownership, and carbon coming in at then third, and then undertaking sustainable design with construction. So all relevant topics. Everybody chose at least something that's keeping a lot of their attention on campus right now. And we thought this would be a good tool to kind of curb our second part of the discussion. So with that, if we're going to land at university strategic and master planning, then I'm going to go back to Mike. And Mike, since that's a big topic for people that are thinking about it, tell us a little bit about University of Rochester's master planning and how they completed the development of a new strategic plan and the boundless possibility.
So boundless possibility is our new strategic plan. It was just released at our October board meeting, and now our job is to update the university master plan to help on executing the strategies that are within the strategic plan. So we took a little bit different approach to figuring out how we wanted to do this than a traditional master plan. So a couple things that are different. One is it's not a campus master plan. It's an institutional master plan. So we really looked at not only our on-campus buildings, but a lot of our off-campus buildings. And we have multiple campuses even within the city that we're in. So we wanted to make sure how they all work together. So instead of them being silos, how are we going to plan for more integration of education and research space between these different buildings and these different areas? That was one. But I think the most interesting thing we did that was really different was how we selected the consultant, and we haven't finished yet, so we're in the midst of it. We have our last presentations going on next week. So in the past, we would send out an RFP. We'd get back a handful of responses we wanted. We'd pick a few finalists. We didn't bring them in for an interview, and we would decide who we're going to spend the next 15 to 18 months with based on an hour interview. And it really wasn't a good way to know the team that you're working with. And as you know, almost any of these firms out there are qualified. It's a matter of which team you're getting and are they a good fit with your institution. So what we decided to do was we sent out a request for qualifications, and then we were going to pick 3 to 4. We ended up with 4 of them, and we hired all 4 at a minimum cost, but we paid them all a stipend, and we asked them all to come on campus, and they had a day and a half to do a charrette with us. And they could do it their own style. We didn't tell them what to do. We wanted to see how they would work. So they each came in and they've spent a day and a half with us now. And our team, they had very different approaches. And now they're coming back and presenting to us, each of them, their approach and their final proposal. And I think it was a really unique approach to doing it. And the reason we wanted to pay them, 2, we wanted to make sure that they put their best effort forth. But second, we wanted to own any ideas they generated. So even though we're not going to select 3 of those 4, good ideas came from all 4 sessions, and we have the ability to incorporate those ideas now into our final product, no matter who we select. So I think, we're looking forward to it. We're trying to avoid some of the common pitfalls of master planning. The last plan we did, as an example, really great firm, really great ideas, very aspirational, but not at all actionable. It was all aspiration. And you really have to balance the aspiration and what you're going to do long term, because you're looking out at 20 to 30 years with short term, can you really do things? You know, they had a lot of buildings that were beautiful buildings that they had planned that sat in parking lots. Well, someone's got to tell administration you have to build structured parking if we're taking that parking away. And that's tenfold the cost of a surface parking lot. So that has to be built into the budget and has to be part of the plan. So really looking at taking all of the infrastructure needs and other things and making sure they're built in from day one. So that first 5 years in particular, that you're looking at plans that has one project probably has 10 enabling projects. And each of those have a cost to it, and making sure we're calculating all of that as we move forward.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, you bring up a lot of great points there. I mean, it takes a team to bring you up, right? And it's a team that's local and that can bring good ideas to the table. And I like how you delineate from aspirations to actionable. Because I think if you can implement everything aspirational, right, you'd be a walk in the park. But you see that things that are aspirational cost a lot of money and a lot of time. Right?
And we have to think about our campuses. So the main campus that we're on, that we're planning for now, will turn 100 so we'll have our centennial during this planning process during the next 5 years. And we think about the way the campus was designed, and we designed our campuses to teach. And today our students come to learn. And it's very different. What that means is they're learning everywhere. It's not just the classrooms. It's in the student housing. Student housing, if you put makerspace in it, different things, they want to be able to learn everywhere they're at on campus. So all the different pieces come together.
Russ, one thing that comes to mind since the number one was strategic planning, that's a little bit different than a broad campus planning, is just our operational strategic planning in facilities. And so at our campus, we have a very large housing portfolio. I think we're 6th in the country. We have 14,000 students that live in UMass Amherst housing on campus. And so up until about 4 years ago, Student Affairs was responsible for operating the residence halls, all the assignment process, but also custodial and maintenance. And so there was a really big disconnect strategically on campus. And so our CFO and our Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs and Campus Life had engaged in a consultant to develop a plan. And so we actually launched it end of January 2020, and we all know what happened about 6 weeks later with all of those 14,000 students going home. But there's a great opportunity there. And so I know we learned from many institutions here that have gone through the same process, but it was definitely a great strategic effort that I think has enhanced our campus.
Thanks, Shane. I mean, you bring up another good thing here too, is that collaboration. It sounds like it's not all internal here. It's public, private collaboration. Just bring all the best resources to the table for your campus needs. It's fantastic. I'm going to go to Lisa over at Cornell University. And this has been a topic I've been really interested to hear more about, is how does higher ed determine the true cost of ownership? Because that's another space that everyone's really working to advocate for appropriate funding.
Sure. I can touch a little bit too on master planning before I go in there, because Cornell, the last time Cornell updated their master plan was in 2008, which is a horrible time to roll out a master plan. And it hasn't been touched yet, but housing did take a look a few years ago at doing a renewal plan and never had a live-in requirement. And so we just opened up 2,000 beds on our North Campus of new construction and an all-you-care-to-eat dining unit, and then transitioned to a 2-year live-in requirement and a meal plan requirement. So Cornell's been taking a lot of look at how do you support a lot of your students who need increasing financial aid, and if you can build a lot of that stuff into the requirements, then it allows a lot of that stuff to be covered. We found we had a lot of food insecurity on our campus. But now building those 2,000 beds allowed us to take other older inventory offline. So our campus is now over 150 years old. And we had a women's residence hall that housed 435 women. The furniture in it was original from 1935.
Antiques.
It was antiques, and that's how we were able to sell it as antiques. But it has allowed housing to really start to renew that stock, and it actually has now created some challenges where we sell the rooms at all the same rate. And so some people are living in what's called our Gothic facilities, And I'd love to try to market that as a Harry Potter theme or something, but that's what it feels like living there. And so comparing that to our newer facilities and newer amenities and bathroom ratios has been a real challenge. But what we're starting to see a problem with is this growth that I was talking about. We're expanding research facilities. Our computer information science program has taken off, doubling that size of that college right now. And we're really rushing through construction, hurry up, get it done, try to do it as cheap as possible, which really, when that building turns over to our group is a challenge, right? So we're not setting aside or understanding the real investment needs and the ownership of the next 50 years of that facility. We haven't really increased our funding to support that or our headcount to deal with things, and we're seeing a lot of technology become obsolete very quickly. Right? I have 60-year-old elevators that are operating great on campus, and I'm replacing my 15-year-old ones. And now we have lighting controls that are obsolete and other things that are becoming a challenge for us, and we did not figure out what it was going to take to fund all of that need in a shorter amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lisa, or anyone else on the panel here, how often when you get a donor provide an endowment for a new building, do they slice off some of that funding for operations and maintenance that go into your operations and maintenance?
We try to raise 15% more to cover a long-term renewal, not for day-to-day R&M, but to put the money in an endowment, the university's endowment, so that in 40 years, when the roof needs to be replaced or major mechanical components need to be replaced and upgraded, there's money there for it. Now, we're not always successful, but development, work closely with them, trying to put that as an internal tax, if you will, on the cost of a project.
Mm-hmm. That's a good best practice, Doug. I haven't heard a lot of those.
So we also try to put together an endowment for any new building that's donor-based, but I'll be honest, it was a guess of how much money you needed to put in there. And Alan McNiff, who's in the office, is our AVP of facilities. He personally took on that challenge to say, I'm going to put real costs behind this. And it was a shock. They needed almost double in the endowment than they thought they did to maintain these buildings properly over time and to pay those costs. So I think getting the awareness and attention out there is really important.
Do you see that the endowments come with certain recommendations or requirements that the facility needs to be certain state-of-the-art or optimized or control, or is it just put the building in the best cost you can?
So we haven't done that. That's good, but you bring up a great point. That's really one of the challenges we all face on a regular basis, right? We have facilities, operations, and we have planning, design, and construction, and they're designed to conflict, because we have the design and construction team that we tell what are the two main things they're focused on: schedule and budget. Do it as fast as you can for as little cost as possible. And they're making decisions based on capital expense that then the facilities operations side needs to live with. So the point of total cost of ownership, that's really the area we have to focus on. So we brought in a third independent group, which is our commissioning team. And they are really the liaison between those two, focused on value and total cost of ownership. To understand, because when you look at a 40-year life of a building, typically 90% of the cost during that 40 years is going to be the operations, yet we're making all of the decisions on the first 10%, because that's what the capital budget was. So how do we balance that? So we've looked at things, when we look at total cost of ownership, what's the right ROI, right? We can't gold plate everything and have a 20-year ROI on something. So where do you break the lines? We've said, the easy rule of thumb is anything under 3 years ROI you should do. Anything over 7, probably not. 3 to 7, we should have a group to sit down and talk about what makes sense and what doesn't.
Seems like a fair range, 3 to 7. At least you have some good parameters there, right? Of what goes in now, what gets held off for later. Doug, I want to come back over to you, and since we're kind of talking about new facilities and talking about how does sustainable design get woven into construction right now?
Yeah, I believe it has to really be part of your core values. And so, again, linkage back to a campus master plan. I've seen many of these across the country, and they're that thick or thicker. we've chosen a different path. The backup, the utilities, detailing on all the sort of GIS mapping, that's important information. It's for the facilities team. I always put that in an appendix. Our campus plan is 24 pages long. And it's about planning values, shows the current state of the campus in an inventory, and where we've been in the last maybe 20 years, and then where we're headed for the next 5 to 10. So it's very readable for particularly leadership, trustees, et cetera, and benefactors pick up and understand where we're headed. One of those core values is that we're going to continue to be very mindful of our sustainable practices. And we've chosen, like many people, to follow LEED. So I can sense the uniform eye roll about LEED, because it can be a pain. It's expensive to a certain extent. You've got to do some additional commissioning, et cetera. But in the end, that third-party evaluation and the sort of accreditation that you get out of it helps us answer the questions that our students and our faculty and our alums are particularly asking us, and that are, as you continue to grow your campus, how can you do that in an environmentally responsible way? Well, this is considered still in this country the best practice. Yeah, you can do green globes and others, so I don't disparage those. Those are all fine as well. We've chosen LEED, and we were a late comer to it. I think our first LEED certified building goes to 2009, but we have 22 of those buildings now, all about gold, yet to get a platinum, but we're soon to do that. As an equivalent, it's 25% of our campus is now made up of a LEED building, LEED certified building. So now we have a lot of metrics from that, and we can go back and see that these buildings are energy intensive significantly less than the rest of campus. And so there's some payback there on an energy utilization standpoint, certainly on carbon and our carbon density and intensity. There's a benefit for that. And so we're really guided by that core principle, and right now, LEED is the method we chose.
That's really refreshing for you to say that, Doug, because LEED's been around for 15 years now. I mean, how many LEED accredited
30
professionals?
probably.
30? Maybe 30? How many LEED accredited professionals do we have here in the room? All right. Anybody grandfathered in and not having to take the annual credentials? Yeah. Thank God for that. Huh? I lost the LEED credentials a while ago. But that's fantastic. That's a good roadmap, right? That you're able to use those metrics there, and gives you a benchmark, gives you expectations, and it gives you ratings, right? And do you really promote that awareness to the student body and the faculty, or what do you do with all that?
We try not to oversell it, because there's some limitations. I mean, quite frankly, there's some conflict in the LEED requirements. We're promoting maximizing daylighting into buildings, yet the window is very inefficient envelope, and there's sort of other conundrums built into it. But in the end, it seems to be the standard, not just even in the US, but beyond. And so while we're not sort of puffed our chest out and say, look at all this, it's there to ready to answer when we are pushed.
Fantastic.
I would add too, I totally agree with everything Doug said, and you have to build your buildings right in the first place, but then we have to also maintain them. And that's where a lot of this falls off. And I have to tell you, one of the best tools we have out there today are our building automation systems. And we've always been able to gather data, but we haven't been able to use the data as well. I think today we could find a lot more problems quicker and know where to put our effort to start fixing problems where we see large energy losses, whether it's steam traps or valves. You look at usage of your utility rates, and it's pretty obvious where there's a problem pretty quick, and we can send people out to attack those and fix them.
Retro commissioning.
Yes.
We have to do that.
And I think on the workforce, we're seeing it at UMass Amherst that with so much electrification and heat pump technology, we're trying to hire. And I think because so many homes and businesses are moving to electrification, it's really hard for us to hire right now. And so we have to go out to service contractors, and sometimes their response time isn't what we would need. And so now that we have heat pump technology in student housing, where we have students with families, graduate students with families, and heat pump technology, that's their home, and we need to be able to respond really fast. So I think the workforce challenges with the electrification is going to continue to be a problem.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The electrification, oh, go
I
ahead.
would add on to electrification, because that is one, I'm sure, Lisa, you're dealing with the same thing. You know, the state really wants us to be carbon neutral, and, you know, we have resisted, we had the big push, right, to make a pledge that we'd be carbon neutral by 2050, and we said, no, we can't make a pledge, because that's a commitment, and we don't have a plan to get there yet. We'll set a goal to get there, but we can't do it. So we looked at it, so we're fortunate in Western New York, we have the cleanest electrical grid in the country. A lot of hydropower thanks to Niagara Falls just down the road, but we can't move over to electrification. So if we can electrify everything, we'd get rid of all our greenhouse gas emissions. 85% of our emissions today come from natural gas burning. So starting with that, so we did analysis. To replace all the natural gas and go electric, $1.3 billion is what it would cost just to do that. Okay, now if money's not a problem, then I have the second issue. When I move off natural gas and onto the grid, I lose my resiliency. So we have the hospitals and we have our research facilities that we completely back up with cogen through natural gas. So if I don't have that, so we then have the risk of losing research and critical functions if the grid goes down. So if I don't care about money and I don't care about the resiliency, I still can't make the change because our local utility could not take all that electric on the grid. The national grid is not designed yet to take the power consumption that we use as a university. So those are all the things that we have to figure out before we could get there.
So Cornell has a commitment to 2035 neutrality, which is an expensive one, and we're doing some really experimental things right now to try to figure that out, and we're having a lot of conversations about the reliability aspect of that, right? We also have Ithaca, New York has their Green New Deal, which is not allowing us to, if I have to replace a heating unit, I can't put it back on natural gas. So I'm being forced to do certain things a little bit faster or differently than we might have strategically tried to approach that. But yeah, reliability has been a big discussion with us.
Yeah, and you bring up some interesting terminology. I mean, you got pledges, commitments, policy, executive orders, goals, you know, all these terms, year 2030, 2035, 2050. I'm not sure which the right year at this point, somewhere probably in the middle, and maybe it's the pursuit and not the destination here with this whole Carbon Zero initiative. But Shane, I want to keep on that subject there. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, the Carbon Zero initiatives that you're having on campus and what have been some of the surprises?
Sure. Following up on what Doug said, sustainability as a core value of an institution kind of helps drive things. And so UMass Amherst is known for sustainability, and so our chancellor, our former chancellor, had charged us to establish a carbon mitigation task force and charged us to identify what would it take to be carbon zero for heating and cooling by 2032. And this was it was a 10-year horizon. And so certainly studied all different available technologies, tried to look into the future for potential technologies, and the most energy efficient use of electricity is through ground source heat exchange. We know that. And so we did a proof of concept study so that we could really understand how much would it cost, because I think part of the challenge is how can we afford this? And you asked for someone to raise their hand if they've gotten any IRA funding yet to support these, and I didn't see a hand yet. And so I know we're working aggressively to try to attract those funds, but even if you're successful, they show up a year or two in the nonprofit tax return after the project's done. So CFOs having confidence that that's going to still be there is really challenging for us. And so we started a proof of concept study. Again, we have a large campus, huge housing portfolio, and so we identified 42 buildings in the southwest section of our campus, and we went through schematic design of what would it take. And so we have a large array of intramural fields where we could place the 750 wells that we needed for those 42 buildings. It also was a really great exercise because each of the different type of hydronic or air-based heating systems were in the building, so we were able to see what would it take to convert, not just create the ground source heat exchange, but make modifications in a number of different types of buildings. And so that resulted in a very significant price tag that at least now we know. And so if we're all serious about this, we do have to figure out how can we move forward and implement Obviously, 2050 is our overarching kind of state mandate, but our campus does desire to be much more aggressive. And so for carbon zero, I think the biggest challenge for us is funding. I think we feel like if we had a magic wand, we know what we could do. It would be very impactful and challenging, but because of that, we still want to advance. So we don't want to wait. We want to continue aggressively. And so because we have a very clean central heating plant that burns natural gas, and a significant amount of steam infrastructure on a campus of 14 million gross square feet of space, we're looking and working with a number of partners to try to figure out how can we leverage alternative fuels. Is there an opportunity to continue with new technology? And so we're talking to a number of partners and institutions about opportunities to try to leverage some of our existing infrastructure.
Thanks, Shane. That's a lot right there. I mean, that is a lot of effort, and you brought up the challenges, but also some of the successes that you're seeing on campus, and that you are moving the needle towards that destination, 1 year at a time. And I think this is a good point here where we got 8 minutes left to take any Q&A from the audience on any of the subjects. That you got these campus leaders vulnerable up here to answer any questions. So is there a mic? Oh, here we go. One question right here.
Hi. I wanted to know if any of you have looked at, so two things. One, have you looked at the carbon being absorbed on your campus by your trees and your plants to look at offsetting some of your carbon? So, and are you aware that there is now an urban and community forestry certification program you can use? So if you haven't done that, I suggest that. And the other thing is, right now the government under USDA is giving out like millions of dollars to go toward biomass energy, so combined heat and power, and I wondered if any of you were looking at that as a replacement for some of your natural gas systems, is to go with community heat and power, or biomass community heat and power. Thank you.
Sure, I can start, Russ.
Sure.
So we have looked at trees for carbon sequestration. We own several thousand acres of forest in the Commonwealth, and so we are, again, trying everything we can to identify. So we have looked at that. What was the second part of the question?
Biomass.
Oh yeah, biomass.
Millions
I
of
chose
dollars.
to forget that one. So we've had we have looked at it in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have very strict permitting processes, and there are many areas that have tried to implement it, and there's significant pushback from the communities about that. So it's a challenge. We know it's technology that could work, but I think at our scale too, we did do a more refined study on a very small satellite camp area of our campus that doesn't have significant facilities. And even in that smaller setting, there was definitely some community concern about the amount of emissions from it.
Yeah, we've taken a look at biomass as well, and I think sort of shied away from it for the time being. Number one, lack of a reliable supply, and number two, it's still putting carbon in the air. To me, that's still an open loop. Yeah, it's taking biological carbon, but it's still burning it and putting CO2 up in the air, and I'm not sure the recapture of it back into organic material is the long-term solution. So I think we're doing diversification. We've got 3,000 geothermal wells underneath parking lots and play fields. We're lucky to have a hydro dam just a mile away from campus we get the direct power from, and we're building a solar array at the moment. So diversification is key for us. I think we're all going to wait for this new technology that's going to replace our baseline boilers in time, and maybe it's the small package nuclear. There was a story that I think in the Times over the weekend on sort of the U.S. betting its future there. So more to come.
Thank you, Doug. Any other questions?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you so much for your insight and information this morning. It's really helpful. I have two questions. The first one, everybody sat up there and talked about money. Almost in every subject money was the elephant in the room, right? If we had all the money. In our district, we recently did the Seymour projects, which you pay a markup up front to have a contractor come in and be your construction manager, but on the back end, it's useful because now they're in since day one, right? You mentioned P3s, and we're looking into that. And my question for you is, do you find there's any extra fees, or you pay a higher price because you have to manage those partnerships and you have to get a third party in, and is it worth those fees? Is it worth the headache at the end of the day, because money is an issue? And look, I pinch every penny like it's my own. You would swear, it's coming out of my pocket, but I'm trying to get to that next project, that next one. That's question number one. And question number two, you talked about strategic master plan, and I'm just curious, what kind of timeline does that really take to put together a true strategic master plan for your university?
Sure. So on the P3 savings, we went into it expecting that the private developer could deliver the total project cost most likely at a lower cost. Massachusetts has some pretty strict construction procurement rules, some of which have to get followed even in a P3 setting because it's on state property. But one of the things that it enabled, which we actually need to receive governor approval for alternate procurement, but that allows a design build on a project of $250 million, which we definitely see some designer cost savings there. So I would say at the end of the day, you got to really look at what are your primary goals and objectives. In our case, we had two different aspects of the project. We had to replace student family housing, and then we had to build new graduate, undergraduate housing. And so we also did not want to have debt service, and so we entered into a 65-year service concession agreement. So the buildings we own, they're our buildings, they're getting built for us. We have no out-of-pocket costs associated with it, and we received a upfront service concession fee from the developer that our campus chose to use to offset the cost and help bring down the cost on the student family side. So at the end of the day, it's hard to really know how much would they have saved versus us doing it. I don't think at the end of the day they delivered it probably much cheaper than we could have. But at the end of the day, we transferred all of that construction cost risk to a third-party developer, which was probably the best transfer of risk for us.
Cornell had a different experience in that space with our 2,000 beds that I mentioned earlier on North Campus. We started as a P3, we did not finish as a P3. So we can talk offline about what happened there, but we did still have to have our own project management team kind of managing that group of people.
So I'll just quickly say something about P3 before answering your other question about the plan. So we're a private institution, so we have found that typically a P3 is not going to deliver it at a better price than we can. The advantage is the risk transfer and potentially not having to put it on our balance sheet. It's the capital. And we have to prioritize what debt we're willing to take on. And if you could transfer some of the risk to the P3 partner and developer, then you could keep it off your balance sheet from a debt capacity standpoint. And in terms of timing so the strategic plan itself was led by the president and our board and our provost. That took about a year to complete. And then we've had estimates on the master plan with our consultants right now. Low end is 14 months, high end is 18 months. We're figuring it's probably going to be about 15. One of the biggest challenges, though, we've pushed all of them is you don't stop work for those 15 to 18 months. How do we look at the work that's in the pipeline and put it in that plan so that we can continue with all the projects we have going while not jeopardizing the future as well?
Thank you, Mike. This has been a really fantastic discussion, I'll tell you. And we had more things to say. So it's a good thing we're going to be here for the next couple of days. You can learn more, and we have some great sessions that are going to dive deeper into our topics here. But let's give a round of applause to Mike, Shane, Lisa, and Doug.